The flashing red and blue lights painted my front porch like a crime scene. Two police cruisers blocked my driveway, while my so-called HOA president, Ruby Howard, stood in the middle of it all, waving her arms like she was directing a Broadway show. "Officer, that's him. He threatened me," she shouted, pointing straight at me as if I were some kind of fugitive. I stood there in my worn flannel shirt, a wrench still in my hand from fixing my mailbox, wondering how a quiet Saturday morning had turned into this circus. All I'd done was tell her not to park her shiny silver SUV on my private driveway. But in Ruby's world, the rules don't apply to Ruby. So now, at 65 years old, I was facing two cops, a hysterical HOA president, and a very real chance of being arrested on my own property. Before I tell you how it all went down, comment below where you're watching from and what time it is, and make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss how this HOA story ends. Before Ruby Howard ever showed up, life in Maple Grove Estates was, well, quiet, predictable, peaceful in that boring, comforting kind of way you don't realize you love until someone takes it away. I'd been living there for 25 years, long enough to watch the trees I planted turn into real shade, and the kids on the block grow into adults who still waved at me when they visited their parents. I retired from engineering at 60, fixed up the house myself, and thought I'd spend the rest of my years tinkering in my garage, tending to my rose bushes, and enjoying the view from my porch swing with a cup of black coffee. The neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it had heart. We had potluck dinners every spring, a 4th of July barbecue down by the park, and everyone pretty much knew to leave each other alone. The HOA back then was more of a formality, a dusty committee that sent out newsletters about lawn care tips, and once a year reminded folks not to set off fireworks too close to the pond. Nobody ever got fined. Nobody cared who parked where, as long as it wasn't in front of a fire hydrant. My house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a few hundred feet off the main road. My driveway wasn't like the others. It was long, curving, lined with old oak trees I'd planted with my late wife, Mary. We'd bought the house with an easement deed, meaning that driveway was mine fully and legally. Not a shared access, not a common lot. Private property. I'd even put up a neat wooden sign, "Private Drive." No parking, not because I was a grump, but because I valued peace and order. For 2 decades, nobody ever questioned it. My neighbors Mark, the retired firefighter, Linda, who ran the neighborhood book club, and Tom, a quiet mechanic, knew it was my space. Mark once joked, "Ethan, your driveway's so long it could be its own zip code." We laughed. It was just part of the rhythm of life there. Then, one summer afternoon, a moving truck rolled up to the big brick house across the street. Out stepped Ruby Howard, high heels clicking on the pavement, sunglasses the size of saucers, and an expression that said the world revolves around me. I remember waving. She didn't wave back. Instead, she surveyed the cul-de-sac like a general inspecting enemy territory. Within a week, she'd introduced herself to every neighbor, though introduced might not be the right word. She announced her arrival. "I'm Ruby Howard. I'm a realtor, I work in property management, and I'll be running for the HOA board this fall." Most of us smiled, politely said, "Nice to meet you," and went back to mowing our lawns. But Ruby didn't like being ignored. The first real sign of trouble came a few weeks later. One morning, I found a bright orange flyer taped to my mailbox. "Notice HOA will be reviewing landscaping compliance standards to ensure visual uniformity. Homeowners may be asked to adjust fencing or plantings to match community guidelines." At the bottom, in big, bold letters, signed Acting President Ruby Howard. I almost spat out my coffee. Acting President, I hadn't even realized there'd been an election. Turns out, the old president, Mr. Green, had moved to Florida, and Ruby had volunteered to fill the position until the next vote. Nobody objected because, honestly, nobody cared enough to. But Ruby cared. Oh, she cared too much. Within weeks, she'd sent 3 more notices, one about trash can placement, one about unauthorized lawn ornaments, Tom's gnome army, and another about the height inconsistency of Linda's picket fence. It didn't stop there. She started organizing what she called HOA beautification patrols, groups of residents walking around the block taking pictures of violations. The woman turned a friendly neighborhood into a surveillance zone. I kept my head down. My property was clean, my fence within code, my grass neatly trimmed. What could she possibly find wrong with me? Well, Ruby didn't need a reason. She just needed a target. It started innocently enough. She came by one day while I was washing my truck. "Morning, Mr. Kelly," she said with that syrupy smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "You know, your driveway gives such a private impression. We're trying to make Maple Grove more welcoming to guests. Have you ever thought of removing that private drive sign?" I looked up from my hose. "No, Ruby, I haven't. That sign's been there since '98. Keeps delivery vans from blocking my garage." Her lips tightened. Well, it just looks exclusionary. We're a community after all, I shrugged. Community or not, that patch of concrete's on my deed. Folks are welcome to wave when they drive by. They just can't park on it. She forced a laugh the kind people make when they're planning revenge. A few days later, I caught her Lexus parked halfway up my driveway, engine running door open while she chatted on her phone. I walked out calmly and tapped on her window. Hey, Ruby, you're blocking my garage. She lowered her sunglasses, gave me that smug little smile. Oh, relax, Ethan. It's just for a second. I'm taking a call with the county assessor's office. I pointed to the sign. Second or not, Ruby, this isn't HOA property. She muttered something under her breath and sped off gravel, spitting behind her tires. That's when I realized this wasn't about convenience, it was about control. Ruby didn't like that she couldn't tell me what to do. My private drive sign might as well have been a challenge to her authority. Over the next few weeks, she doubled down. I started getting violation letters in the mail, accusing me of non-compliance with community uniformity standards. Apparently my mailbox post was non-approved wood stain, and my fence too rustic. Every time I walked outside, I felt her eyes watching from across the street. Her curtains would twitch, her phone camera would flash. Linda joked, she's got more pictures of your yard than her own. I laughed, but truthfully it was starting to get to me. Then came the final straw. Ruby pushed through a new temporary parking policy at the next HOA meeting, claiming residents could temporarily park in any open driveway within the community during events or overflow periods. I raised my hand. You can't just give people permission to park on private property. That's not how it works. Ruby smiled sweetly. Oh, Ethan, everyone here is part of Maple Grove. Don't you think it's a little selfish to hoard space? The room went quiet. Some folks avoided eye contact. Others just shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Nobody wanted to challenge her. I did. You call it hoarding, I call it ownership. Her smile vanished. We'll see about that. From that day forward, I knew Ruby was going to test me, and I was right. Because a few Saturdays later, I woke up to find 3 SUVs parked across my driveway, blocking my truck, my garage, and even my mailbox. And one of them, of course, was Ruby's. That was the day everything changed. When I stepped outside that morning and saw those SUVs blocking my driveway, I thought for a second I might still be dreaming. 3 gleaming vehicles, 2 silver, 1 black, lined up like a barricade right across my concrete. Ruby's Lexus sat in the middle, perfectly centered, her license plate sparkling under the sun like a trophy. I stood there, barefoot, coffee mug in hand, the steam rising as my blood started to boil. Across the street, Ruby and 2 women I didn't recognize were laughing and chatting like they owned the whole cul-de-sac. They were holding clipboards, of course, and snapping photos of my house. I called out, Ruby, what's this? She turned, flashing that politician's smile. Morning, Ethan. We're just doing the HOA's spring inspection. Overflow parking's allowed today under the new community rule. I took a long breath. On my driveway, she tilted her head, all innocence. The HOA's policy allows temporary use of common areas, Ethan. This space is accessible from the street, so technically I cut her off. Technically, Ruby, that's my land. You can check the county assessor's map if you need a refresher. The women beside her giggled nervously. One of them whispered, He's serious, Ruby. Ruby waved her off. He's just being territorial. I set my mug down on the porch railing and started walking toward the cars. Move them. Now. Her smile faded. Excuse me, you heard me. Move them or I'll have them towed. That got her attention. She took a step forward, squaring her shoulders like she was ready to go to war. You wouldn't dare. That would be a violation of community cooperation standards. I almost laughed. You made that term up, didn't you? Ruby's eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. The HOA has jurisdiction here, Ethan. You can't just decide who parks where. Funny, I said, pulling my phone from my pocket because the county says otherwise. I opened a saved PDF, the property deed I'd kept handy ever since Ruby started her nonsense. Lot 22B, full easement from Maple Grove Lane to the west-facing garage, recorded in 1998. Private property. Ruby's jaw tightened. You can't show me legal documents on your phone and expect me to. I can, and I just did. That was when she lost it. She stomped toward me in her heels, her face flushed red. You are harassing me, Ethan Kelly. You are making this neighborhood hostile. Hostile, I asked, spreading my arms. You're the one trespassing. The women with her stepped back, whispering something about maybe we should go, but Ruby wasn't backing down. Oh, don't you worry, she said, snatching her phone from her purse. I'm calling the board, and if you touch those cars, I'll call the cops. Call whoever you want, I said, turning toward my garage. I'll be waiting. I walked back inside, shaking my head, but I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. I wasn't angry, at least not yet, but I could sense something ugly brewing. Ruby didn't just want to win an argument. She wanted to prove she could control me. I spent the next hour fixing a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink, pretending I couldn't hear her outside. But every few minutes I caught snippets through the window. He's so aggressive. I'm the president. I have authority. Yes, I'm documenting everything. By noon I had enough. I called the Maple County Sheriff's Office, not the HOA line, not the city parking enforcement, but real law enforcement. I explained the situation calmly. Trespassers on private property, multiple warnings given. The dispatcher promised to send someone out. When I stepped outside again, Ruby was now filming herself in front of my truck, narrating like she was on a reality show. "This is what harassment looks like," she said dramatically, phone camera pointed right at me. A man trying to intimidate a woman for simply doing her duty for the community. I blinked. "Ruby, you're parked on my land." She ignored me, still talking to her camera. "If anything happens to me, you'll know who's responsible." "Lady," I muttered, "you're 2 feet from my mailbox, not a war zone." That's when I noticed Mark, my firefighter neighbor, walking up the street holding a rake. He stopped at the edge of my lawn and gave me a look that said, "You okay?" I nodded slightly. He called out, "Morning, Ruby." "Didn't realize we had valet parking now." Ruby's voice turned sharp. "This doesn't concern you, Mark." "Oh, it does," he said. "That driveway's private. Been that way since my kids were in middle school." Ruby sneered. "Stay out of it." Mark chuckled and turned to me. "Want me to get my tow buddy on the line?" That was enough to make Ruby panic. "Don't you dare," she snapped. "Touch my car and I'll have both of you arrested." "Good luck with that," Mark said, walking away. By the time the sheriff's deputy arrived, Ruby was pacing in front of her car, muttering into her phone about legal precedents. The deputy, a tall man with mirrored sunglasses, Officer Daniels, according to his badge, walked up calm but firm. "Afternoon, folks." "Got a call about a parking dispute," Ruby jumped in before I could speak. "Yes, thank you, officer. This man is threatening me and my friends for using a public driveway. He's screaming at us, trying to block us in." I raised a hand. "None of that's true, officer. I asked them to move their cars from my private property." Daniels looked between us. "Private property, huh? You got proof?" I pulled the folder I'd printed weeks ago, paper copies of my deed, the plat map, and even the HOA's own bylaws, showing that individual lots were exempt from common parking policies. Daniel studied them for a moment, then gave me a slow nod. "Looks pretty clear to me, ma'am. This driveway's his." Ruby's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "That can't be right." "The HOA. The HOA doesn't override county property lines," Daniel said flatly. "If you're parked here without permission, you're trespassing." Ruby's face twisted into something almost comical, a mix of disbelief and fury. "I'll file a complaint. You'll hear from my lawyer," Daniels sighed. "Ma'am, you can file whatever you want, but you're moving those cars right now." Ruby stomped to her, Lexus muttering obscenities. Her 2 friends hurried into their SUVs and reversed out, gravel crunching beneath their tires. Ruby lingered just long enough to glare at me through her window. "This isn't over," she hissed. I smiled, calm as ever. "Didn't think it was." When they were gone, Daniels chuckled. "You'd be surprised how many of these HOA folks think they run the world." "Oh, I'm not surprised," I said, shaking his hand. "Thanks for coming out." As he drove off, I exhaled for what felt like the first time all morning. My driveway was clear again, the sun hitting the pavement just right, and for a fleeting moment I thought maybe Ruby would finally back off. But Ruby Howard wasn't the backing off type. That evening, I found a fresh letter in my mailbox, HOA stationery, of course. Notice of community disruption. You have engaged in hostile and uncooperative behavior toward HOA officials during a scheduled community event. Future incidents will result in disciplinary action and potential legal escalation. Signed, President Ruby Howard. I laughed out loud. Legal escalation. From the same woman who'd just been warned by a sheriff's deputy, still something in my gut told me this was just the beginning. Ruby wasn't done making my life miserable, and the next round of her nonsense would make this little parking stunt look like a warm-up act. It happened 2 Saturdays later, the day the whole neighborhood would remember as the HOA Festival of Chaos. I woke up early, same as always, made my coffee, and opened the curtains to find an unusual amount of activity outside. Balloons, folding tables, a big banner stretching across the entrance that read Maple Grove, Open House, Welcome New Residents. Below it in smaller letters, sponsored by the HOA board. And right in the center of it all stood Ruby Howard, wearing a bright pink blazer, holding a clipboard and barking orders like a general before battle. I groaned. Of course. She'd been hyping this community open house for weeks, promising to unite the neighborhood. What she really meant was that she wanted a public stage, and from the looks of it, she'd found one. I stepped onto my porch watching as cars began rolling in. First a few sedans, then a string of shiny SUVs. People parked anywhere they could, on curbs, on lawns, even in front of mailboxes. Ruby strutted between them, pointing out where to go like she was the mayor of a small delusional town. Then my stomach dropped. 3 cars again turned down my driveway. I waved my arms. Hey, hold up, that's private property. But they didn't stop. They kept inching forward until they filled the entire lane in front of my garage. I stomped down the steps, my slippers crunching on the gravel. You folks can't park here. The driver of the first car, a man in a polo shirt, rolled down his window. Ruby said we could. Said it's community overflow parking. I could practically feel my blood pressure spike. Yeah, well, Ruby's wrong again. Move the cars before I have them towed. He hesitated. She's the HOA president. I'm the property owner, I snapped. And that sign, I pointed at the wooden board reading, Private Drive. No parking isn't just decoration. He sighed, rolled his window up, and backed out. But the other 2 cars stayed. Then right on cue, Ruby appeared, clipboard in hand, sunglasses glinting, smirk firmly in place. Ethan, she said sweetly, why are you yelling at my guests? Because your guests are trespassing, I said, folding my arms. Move the cars. She laughed, that irritating, condescending kind of laugh people use when they think they've already won. Oh, Ethan, you're always so defensive. This is a community event. Everyone's allowed to use common access points. This isn't a common anything, I said through gritted teeth. This is my driveway, Ruby. Are you sure? She asked, her tone dripping with mock concern. Because from where I'm standing, it looks connected to the main road, and anything connected to the main road falls under HOA visibility and access. Visibility, yes, I said. Access, no. She tilted her head, pretending to think. Maybe I'll just let the board decide that. I stepped closer. No, you won't. You'll move those cars now. Her smile vanished. Ethan, don't threaten me. Not a threat, I said quietly. A request. She rolled her eyes, waved a hand, and turned toward the crowd of people gathering near the park. Enjoy the event, everyone. Don't mind the noise from grumpy old men who don't understand community spirit. The laughter that followed stung more than I wanted to admit. But I wasn't about to let her humiliate me on my own property. I walked over to her car, the same silver Lexus that had become my personal nightmare, and crouched near the tire, pretending to check the air pressure. Ruby spun around instantly. What are you doing? Taking a picture, I said, holding up my phone. For documentation. Trespassing, unauthorized parking, potential property damage. You know, legal stuff. Her face turned crimson. You're harassing me again, I stood up. No, Ruby. I'm protecting my rights. She took out her phone, hands shaking with anger. That's it. I'm calling the police. Let's see what they have to say about this little stunt. I shrugged. Go ahead. I'll wait right here. And I did. 20 minutes later, the flashing lights of 2 patrol cars cut through the midday sun. Neighbors stopped what they were doing to watch, some pretending to water their lawns, others standing openly at their fences. Officer Reed stepped out first, followed by Officer Daniels, the same deputy who'd handled our last driveway incident. He sighed the moment he saw me. Mr. Kelly, he said, we meet again. Unfortunately, I replied. Ruby marched toward them, already mid-rant. Officer, thank goodness you're here. This man is threatening me. He's photographing my vehicle, yelling at my guests, and obstructing a public event. Reed blinked. Public event. This is a gated community, ma'am. It's open house day, Ruby shouted, waving her clipboard like a sword. The HOA authorized temporary access to all driveways for overflow parking. Daniels rubbed his temple. Did you get permission from the property owners? That's not required, Ruby barked. It's within community jurisdiction. I handed him my folder again. Same papers, same maps, same story. Daniels skimmed the documents, then turned to Ruby. Ma'am, this property is privately owned. The HOA can't override that without consent. Ruby's voice rose to a shriek. That's not fair. He's trying to make me look bad in front of everyone. Ma'am, Reed said calmly, you're doing that yourself. The crowd chuckled. Ruby's glare could have melted steel. I'll sue, she cried. Every one of you will regret this, Daniels exhaled. Ma'am, calm down. Move the cars, or we'll issue a citation for trespassing. That's when Ruby did something I'll never forget. She kicked her own car door. The sound echoed through the cul-de-sac, a loud metallic thud, and then she pointed at me wild-eyed. He did it. He just damaged my car. The crowd gasped. I stared speechless. Are you out of your mind? Reed stepped forward. Ma'am, we saw that. Don't make this worse. But Ruby doubled down, clutching her arm dramatically. He grabbed me. He's violent, Daniel sighed. That's enough. He motioned for Reed to approach her, and within seconds she was surrounded by flashing lights and murmuring neighbors. I'm not leaving, Ruby yelled. This is my right. No, ma'am, Daniel said evenly. It's his driveway. You're under arrest for disorderly conduct. The entire neighborhood fell silent, then erupted in whispers. Cameras came out. Phones clicked. They led Ruby to the squad car, still shouting about false charges and power abuse. Her pink blazer gleamed in the sunlight as she was gently but firmly guided into the back seat. As the police drove off, I just stood there, coffee gone cold in my hand, wondering if I'd actually just seen what I thought I had. Linda came over from across the street, shaking her head. Ethan, I swear our HOA meetings are going to make national news one day. Wouldn't surprise me, I said. You think she'll calm down after this? Linda smiled faintly. You've met Ruby, right? I chuckled. Fair point. By that evening, half the neighborhood had seen the video. Someone had uploaded it to the local community Facebook page with the caption, HOA president arrested for trespassing on resident's driveway. Within hours, it had over 300 comments. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. But Ruby wasn't the kind of person to accept defeat quietly. She was about to drag me and the entire HOA into a full-blown legal war. And this time, she'd make sure the whole town knew about it. If you've never watched a grown woman in a pink blazer being handcuffed for trespassing on a suburban driveway, let me tell you it's a sight that sticks with you. But if you think that was the end of it, you clearly haven't met Ruby Howard. The day after her arrest, my phone buzzed nonstop. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, and even a few concerned citizen voicemails. I ignored them all. Then around noon, my attorney, Sarah Whitman, called. Ethan, she said, her voice half amused, half exasperated, you've become famous. Please tell me it's not on TikTok. Worse, she said. Local news. Channel 8 ran a short segment this morning. HOA president detained after dispute with retired engineer. Guess whose picture they used? Oh, you're kidding. Nope. And get this. Ruby's lawyer, some guy named James Bolton, just filed a harassment complaint. Claims you threatened, intimidated, and physically obstructed her during a community event. I nearly dropped my coffee. Physically obstructed. The only thing I obstructed was her car door with her own foot. Sarah chuckled. I know, Ethan. Don't worry. I've already drafted our response, but she's not letting this go. Of course she wasn't. Ruby wasn't fighting for justice, she was fighting for control. Losing face in front of her neighbors was a wound she couldn't tolerate. By evening, HOA gossip spread faster than wildfire. I caught snippets of conversation whenever I stepped outside. Did you hear Ruby spent the night in holding? She said the cops were sexist. I heard Ethan suing the board. I wasn't suing anyone yet, but Ruby was making sure everyone thought I was the villain. That night she returned home. I watched from my porch as a black sedan dropped her off. She stepped out in flats, this time sunglasses on, even though it was dark. She didn't look at me, didn't look at anyone. She just marched up her driveway, chin-high humiliation radiating off her like heat from asphalt. For a few days, the neighborhood held its breath. No flyers, no emails, no HOA patrols, just silence. I almost started to hope she'd learned her lesson. Then on Friday morning, a certified letter arrived in my mailbox, HOA Legal Department, Bolton and Associates. Subject notice of intent to sue. The Maple Grove Estates Homeowners Association hereby demands that Mr. Ethan Kelly cease and desist from all hostile actions against HOA officers. Mr. Kelly's aggressive conduct has created an unsafe environment for community members. The association seeks immediate removal of signage and fencing deemed unwelcoming and reserves the right to pursue civil damages for defamation and obstruction. Signed, James Bolton, Esquire. I laughed out loud. Defamation and obstruction. Ruby was really stretching her imagination this time. But as funny as it sounded, it wasn't harmless. A lawsuit, no matter how ridiculous, costs time and money, and Ruby knew that. I called Sarah again. She picked up instantly. Got their letter, she asked. Oh, I got it. Framed it, actually. Gonna hang it next to my no trespassing sign. She laughed softly. Ethan, listen. Don't engage with Ruby directly. No calls, no confrontations. We'll respond formally and let the paperwork speak. That's fine, I said. But if she steps on my property again, I'm calling Daniels, not you. Understood, Sarah said. Though honestly, I'd pay to see her face if you did. For a week, things were quiet again, too quiet. Ruby didn't leave her house much. When she did, she avoided eye contact, always on her phone, whispering. But she wasn't done scheming. People like Ruby don't retreat, they regroup. The next HOA board meeting confirmed it. It was held at the community center, a little beige building near the pond. Usually maybe a dozen residents showed up. That night there were over 50. The air buzzed with tension. Ruby sat at the front table beside her lawyer Bolton, flipping through a thick binder. I sat in the back with Mark and Linda, trying to look like I didn't want to strangle someone. Ruby cleared her throat into the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. I'm here to address the recent misinformation circulating about our association and its leadership." "Misinformation," Mark muttered under his breath. "She means facts," Ruby continued. "Certain individuals have attempted to tarnish the HOA's reputation through false claims and public outbursts. These actions do not reflect the values of Maple Grove." I raised my hand. "You mean the video where you got arrested for trespassing?" Gasps rippled through the room. Ruby's smile tightened. "Mr. Kelly, please don't interrupt. You've done enough damage." "Damage," I said loudly. "You mean protecting my own property from your so-called community access policy?" Bolton jumped in. "My client was exercising her duties as HOA president. You escalated the confrontation." I stood. By asking trespassers to move their cars, Ruby slammed her clipboard on the table. "You're harassing me again." Daniels, who had come to observe the meeting, apparently the sheriff's office didn't trust this circus, spoke up from the corner. "Ma'am, sit down. Everyone calm down." But Ruby wasn't calming down. "This man has undermined my authority from day one. He's inciting neighbors, spreading lies, and filming me without consent." Linda spoke up from 2 rows ahead. "That's not true. We all saw what happened. You parked on his driveway. You called the cops." The crowd murmured in agreement. Ruby's face flushed. Bolton whispered something to her, but she waved him off. "This meeting is over. I won't be publicly humiliated by," and then poetic justice struck. From the back of the room, someone projected a video onto the wall. The video: Ruby screaming at the police, kicking her own car door, then being led away in handcuffs. Silence. Then laughter. A wave of it rolling through the crowd like a breeze after a storm. Ruby spun around, horrified. "Turn that off." "That's illegal recording," Mark grinned. "It's from Facebook, sweetheart. Public domain now." Her lawyer's face turned pale. "Miss Howard, perhaps we should," but Ruby was already storming out, red-faced and muttering. The door slammed behind her so hard it rattled the ceiling tiles. Daniel smirked. "Well, that went smoother than last time." By the end of the meeting, the board voted 5-1 to suspend Ruby pending review of her conduct. Bolton packed his papers in silence. Outside, under the soft glow of the streetlights, I felt a rare thing: peace. The night air was cool, the crickets were singing, and for the first time in months, the cul-de-sac didn't feel like a battlefield. Mark clapped me on the shoulder. "Guess you won this round, old man." I smiled. "Not sure it's a win if I had to hire a lawyer to keep people off my own driveway." He laughed. "Fair point. But still, you handled it better than I would've." "Maybe so." But as I looked across the street at Ruby's darkened house, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Because Ruby Howard didn't lose, she plotted. And a woman like that, she'd rather burn down the whole neighborhood than admit defeat. For a few blessed days after that explosive HOA meeting, Maple Grove Estates felt almost normal again. Kids rode their bikes down the street, sprinklers hissed in the distance, and the world seemed to exhale. I started to believe Ruby might finally accept defeat, lick her wounds, and fade into obscurity. I should have known better, because if there's one thing Ruby Howard hated more than being wrong, it was being ignored. It began with Whisper's anonymous posts on the neighborhood Facebook group. Someone calling themselves Community Truth Teller accused me of harassing female HOA members and filming neighbors without consent. Another claimed I had illegal modifications on my property that violated environmental codes. I didn't have to guess who was behind it. The phrasing, the drama, it screamed Ruby. When I mentioned it to Linda, she rolled her eyes. "She's trying to poison the well, Ethan. Don't take the bait." "Not taking it," I said. "But I'll sure as hell document it." I took screenshots of everything, every rumor, every accusation, because I knew where this was heading. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, I received a thick envelope in the mail from Bolton and Associates Ruby's lawyer. Inside was a formal lawsuit notice filed against me and a countersuit from the HOA itself. The list of claims was almost impressive in its absurdity: defamation of character for circulating defamatory recordings, harassment for verbal intimidation and invasion of privacy, property interference for unauthorized signage negatively affecting community value. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Unauthorized signage. They meant my private drive, no parking sign. But what wasn't funny was the fact that I now had to defend myself in court. Again. I called Sarah Whitman, my attorney. She met me at the local diner where I spread the stack of paperwork across the table between us. She skimmed through it, brow furrowing. They're really throwing spaghetti at the wall here. Yeah, I said, and hoping the judge is allergic to common sense. She grinned. Don't worry, we'll file a counterclaim. Trespassing, false accusations, and harassment, and maybe tack on damages for the stress she's caused you. I leaned back in my booth seat. You think that'll stop her? Sarah sipped her coffee. Ethan, I've dealt with people like Ruby before. They build their identity around power. When you take that away, they crumble. I wanted to believe her. But Ruby didn't seem like the crumbling type. She seemed more like the detonate everything and take you with her type. Still, I followed Sarah's advice. I stayed calm, kept records, and refused to engage. Even when Ruby started walking her dog past my house every morning, slowly, deliberately staring at my camera as if daring me to say something I didn't bite. She even started accidentally leaving HOA newsletters in my mailbox, full of passive-aggressive language about cooperation, civility, and respecting leadership. It was almost funny how transparent it was. Almost. But the real fireworks began when the case hit the courtroom. The county courthouse was small old wood paneling, flickering lights, and a single ceiling fan that made more noise than wind. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. When the bailiff called Howard versus Kelly, Ruby strutted in like she was attending a red carpet event. She'd traded her pink blazer for a sleek navy suit and pearl earrings, the picture of dignified leadership. Her lawyer, James Bolton, trailed behind carrying a briefcase stuffed to the brim. Sarah and I sat at the defendant's table. She whispered, "Relax. Judges love deeds and video evidence." The Honorable David Miller, a stern but fair man in his 60s, entered. "Let's make this quick," he said. "I've got 6 HOA disputes today, and I'd like to get home before dinner." That earned a few chuckles. Bolton began his opening statement, a long theatrical speech about toxic masculinity in suburban power structures and the importance of community governance. I think he used the phrase collective harmony 6 times. Then he gestured dramatically toward Ruby. "My client has suffered humiliation, stress, and reputational damage due to the defendant's ongoing campaign of hostility." Ruby sniffled on cue, producing a tissue. Sarah stood calm and composed. "Your Honor, my client's only campaign was defending his private property from repeated trespassing by the plaintiff. We have clear legal documents proving ownership and multiple video recordings showing the plaintiff ignoring posted warnings and law enforcement directives." Judge Miller nodded. "You have the footage." Sarah handed him a flash drive. The court clerk loaded it up. And then for the second time, Ruby's meltdown played on a big screen, her screaming at the officers, kicking her Lexus, and accusing me of assault. The audio echoed across the courtroom. Ruby turned bright red. Bolton rubbed his temples. The judge paused the video halfway through, sighing. "Miss Howard," he said dryly, "is there any part of this where you don't appear to be breaking the law?" Ruby stammered. That's out of context," I'm sure he interrupted. "But the context doesn't seem to help you." Laughter rippled through the gallery. Sarah finished her argument with precision. "Your Honor, this case is not about HOA policy. It's about boundaries, both literal and personal. My client respected his. The plaintiff did not." When the judge finally spoke, his words were music to my ears. "The court finds the plaintiff's claims to be without merit. Furthermore, given the evidence of trespassing and defamation, I'm ordering the plaintiff, Miss Howard, to pay the defendant's legal fees and damages for property interference." Ruby gasped. Bolton tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "Ma'am, I suggest you spend less time managing your neighbors' lives and more time managing your own." Gavel. Bang. Case closed. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Sarah patted my arm. "Told you." Ruby stormed out of the courtroom without a word, her heels clacking like gunshots on the tile floor. Outside, Mark was waiting near the steps. He grinned when he saw me. "Heard the good news? You gonna frame that ruling next to your sign, maybe?" I said. "Or tattoo it on my mailbox?" We laughed, but inside I felt something deeper than victory relief. Months of tension, accusations, and hostility were finally over. Or so I thought. 2 days later, I got another knock on the door. This time, it wasn't a cop. It was 2 members of the HOA board, a couple I barely knew, Richard and Paige Thompson, looking sheepish. "Ethan," Richard said, shifting awkwardly, "we, wanted to apologize. For everything. Ruby, she told us some things that weren't true. We didn't know the whole story." I nodded. "I appreciate that." Paige smiled nervously. "We're holding an emergency board vote next week. To remove Ruby permanently and elect a new president, We'd actually like you to consider serving as an advisor, just to help straighten things out. I nearly spit out my coffee. You want me to advise the HOA? After all this, Richard shrugged. You know the rules better than anyone now. I laughed. Let me think about it. I'm not sure my blood pressure can handle another HOA war. They chuckled, thanked me, and left. As I watched them walk away, I finally felt the tension in my chest start to fade. The war with Ruby had cost me time, money, and peace, but it had also earned me something else: respect. And for a man like me, that meant more than any court ruling. The news of Ruby's defeat spread through Maple Grove Estates faster than wildfire on a dry summer day. For the first time in months, the community Facebook page wasn't filled with complaints or HOA reminders. Instead, it was full of memes. One photo showed a cartoon of a pink blazer behind bars captioned, "Breaking news: local HOA president finally learns what private property means." I didn't post it, but I laughed harder than I had in years. Over the next week, people I barely knew stopped me while I was out walking my dog. "You really showed her, Mr. Kelly," they'd say. Or, "About time someone stood up to that woman." It felt strange, honestly. I never set out to be the neighborhood hero. I just wanted peace and quiet. But somehow I'd become the accidental symbol of resistance, the man who took down the tyrant in the pink blazer. Still, something in me couldn't rest easy. People like Ruby don't just vanish. They retreat, plot, and strike again when no one's watching. And sure enough, one afternoon, Sarah Whitman called. "Ethan," she said, "you're gonna love this. Or maybe you won't. Try me. Turns out your favorite HOA president has been busy." I got a call from the county records office this morning. They found multiple anonymous complaints filed by someone listing themselves as a concerned community member. Guess who I side? Ruby. Ding ding. She filed reports about illegal gray water runoff from your irrigation system, excessive lighting from your porch, and even a claim that you were operating an unlicensed business out of your garage. I laughed so hard, I nearly dropped the phone. "What kind of business? Retirement and sarcasm consulting," Sarah chuckled. "Probably. Anyway, the county inspector went by today. Everything checked out perfectly." "You're clean." "Of course I am," I said. "I built that irrigation myself. Just thought you'd like to know." Seems like she's still flailing. "Yeah, but even a drowning person can drag someone down with them," I muttered. A few days later, I found out exactly how far Ruby had fallen. Mark came by one evening, a six-pack of beer in hand. "Heard something wild," he said, plopping down on my porch swing. "You ready, always?" He grinned. "You know that HOA treasurer, Carl Patterson. Turns out he's been keeping receipts. Ruby's receipts." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of receipts?" "The kind that say she's been using HOA funds to pay for her personal landscaping, dry cleaning, and get this community improvement project that doesn't exist. Nearly $7,000 gone." I let out a low whistle. Well, that explains her confidence. Hard to back down when you're hiding something that big. "Exactly." Carl turned everything over to the board. "They're calling a vote to remove her permanently next week. Apparently the county might open an investigation." I sat back, letting that sink in. "You know, Mark, I don't even feel angry anymore. I almost feel sorry for her." Mark laughed. "Don't start growing a conscience now, Ethan." "I'm serious," I said. "People like Ruby, they build their whole identity around control. Take that away, and there's nothing left." Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe, but I'm still bringing popcorn to the vote." When the day of the special HOA meeting came, the entire neighborhood turned up. It was standing room only inside the small community center. Even Officer Daniels showed up, though. This time he was off duty, leaning against the back wall with a grin. At the front of the room sat the remaining board members, Richard and Paige Thompson, plus the treasurer Carl, all looking equal parts, nervous and relieved. Ruby entered last, fashionably late, wearing a black pantsuit like she was attending a funeral, her own. The murmurs quieted as she took her seat. Her once flawless hair was slightly frizzed, her eyes shadowed. Gone was the smug confidence. But as soon as the meeting started, the fire returned. Richard cleared his throat. "This meeting has been called to discuss allegations of financial misconduct involving the former HOA president, Miss Ruby Howard." Ruby shot to her feet. "Former, I'm still the elected president." Paige shook her head. "You were suspended pending review, Ruby. Tonight's vote will determine your removal." Ruby slammed her hands on the table. "This is a witch hunt. All of you are conspiring with him." She jabbed a finger in my direction. "That man has poisoned this neighborhood against me." The crowd erupted with murmurs. Mark called out, "You did that yourself, lady." Ruby ignored him. "Everything I did was for Maple Grove's image, to protect property values." Carl stood holding up a thick folder. Then maybe you can explain why HOA funds were used to pay for your dry cleaning, your home security cameras, and he flipped a page, a $1,200 consultation fee to your cousin's real estate company. Ruby froze. That's community branding expenses. Richard sighed. Ruby, stop. We verified with the bank. These transactions were unauthorized. Lies, she screamed. You're all jealous. Jealous because I made this place look respectable. The room buzzed with shock, anger, and something close to pity. Even those who once supported her sat in silence. Linda spoke softly from the back. You didn't make it respectable, Ruby. You made it miserable. Ruby turned toward her, trembling with rage. You'll all regret this, but nobody believed her anymore. The vote was quick, almost anticlimactic, 46 inches favor of removal, 2 against, and 1 abstention. Ruby's reign of terror officially over. As the crowd dispersed, she sat frozen, staring at nothing. For a brief moment I saw something human behind her bitterness. Defeat, loneliness, maybe even shame. I walked past her quietly on my way out. Ruby, I said, stopping just beside her. She didn't look up. Enjoy your victory, Ethan. I hesitated. It's not about victory, it's about peace. She finally met my eyes, tears gathering. There's no peace in places like this, just power. And you'll see that soon enough. I nodded slowly. Maybe, but power without respect doesn't last long. Then I walked away. That night I stood in my driveway under the glow of the porch light. For the first time, in what felt like forever, the air was still. No shouting, no engines idling, no HOA notes taped to my mailbox. Just quiet. I took out a small can of paint and brushed a fresh coat over the old wooden sign, Private Drive, No Parking. The letters gleamed dark and bold against the grain. Linda walked by with her golden retriever, smiling. Looks good, Ethan. Strong message. Thanks, I said. Let's hope it sticks this time. She laughed. Well, if not, at least we've got you to keep us in line. I grinned. I'd rather just keep my driveway clear. The next morning, a small envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside a folded sheet of paper, you win. I'm leaving Maple Grove. Don't worry, you won't hear from me again. But remember, every HOA needs a villain. Maybe someday that'll be you. R.H. I read it twice, then tucked it away in a drawer. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel anger, just relief. Ruby was gone. The war was over. And maybe, just maybe, Maple Grove could start being a neighborhood again, not a battlefield. As I watched the sunrise spill across the street, the world looked different. Softer, kinder, and for once no one was parked on my driveway. For weeks after Ruby's departure, Maple Grove Estates felt like a completely different world. The tension that had once hung in the air like static finally lifted. You could feel it in the way people talked, smiled, and lingered on their porches in the evenings again. It was as if someone had opened the windows of the entire neighborhood and let the fresh air back in. The new HOA board moved quickly to clean up the mess Ruby left behind. Richard Thompson was elected as interim president, a quiet, level-headed man who actually listened when people spoke. He and Paige sent out a letter to every household apologizing for past missteps and promising a transparent, cooperative era of community management. It was the first time in HOA history that I didn't immediately toss their letter into the trash. Mark stopped by a few nights later with a cold beer and a grin. So you're officially the neighborhood legend now, huh? Legend, I chuckled. I'm just the guy who didn't want cars on his driveway. Yeah, he said, sitting down beside me. And now you're the guy who saved the whole block from the HOA dictator. Please, I said. You make it sound like I stormed the capital of Maple Grove. He laughed. You kind of did. Linda joined us a few minutes later, bringing her famous lemon pie. I baked this for you, Ethan. Consider it a peace offering from the rest of us for letting things get that out of hand. I smiled. You don't owe me anything, Linda. I know, she said softly, but you stood up when the rest of us were too scared to. I didn't say anything for a while. We sat there together, 3 neighbors who had gone through the strangest suburban war imaginable, watching the sunset turn the cul-de-sac gold. Across the street, Ruby's old house sat dark. A for sale sign leaned slightly in the yard. I heard she'd moved to another town a few counties away. No one really knew where, and no one seemed interested in finding out. The last rumor said she was working part-time for a different HOA. Some lessons, it seemed, never stuck. Still, I couldn't bring myself to hate her anymore. Ruby was infuriating, manipulative, and dangerous with authority, but she was also a person who clearly needed control to feel relevant. Without it, she'd been lost. Somewhere between the lawsuits and the shouting matches, she'd stopped being a villain to me and started being a cautionary tale. A few mornings later, I got a letter from the new HOA board. It wasn't a fine or a complaint this time, just an invitation. Dear Mr. Kelly, the Maple Grove Board is creating a property rights advisory committee to help prevent future conflicts and educate residents about land ownership laws. Given your experience, we'd be honored if you'd consider joining us as a volunteer advisor. I laughed out loud when I read it. They wanted me, the man who'd been their biggest thorn, to help teach them about private property. When Mark heard, he nearly spit out his coffee. You gonna do it? I thought about it for a long moment. Then I smiled. Yeah, maybe I will. Someone's got to make sure this circus doesn't start up again, so I joined. Not officially on the board, but as what they called a resident consultant. Once a month, I'd sit in a meeting, answer questions, and occasionally remind people that not every patch of concrete belonged to the HOA. To my surprise, it wasn't miserable. Richard was fair. Paige was organized. Carl, the treasurer, had tightened up the finances. There was actual order now, not the kind that controls people, but the kind that keeps peace. One evening after a meeting, Paige stopped me in the parking lot. Ethan, she said, I have to tell you. You changed the way we look at things. You reminded us that rules are supposed to protect people, not punish them. That stuck with me. Later that night, I took my usual evening walk down the lane. The crickets were out, the air smelled of pine and cut grass, and the houses glowed warm in the dark. I passed Linda's house. She waved from her porch. Then Mark's, where his grandkids were roasting marshmallows in the yard. When I reached my own gate, I paused for a moment. The wooden sign still stood tall: private drive. No parking. I'd repainted it once more, not because I needed to, but because it had become a reminder not just of the fight I'd won, but of what it meant. That sign wasn't about keeping people out. It was about boundaries, the kind that make peace possible. You see, there's something funny about life in these HOA neighborhoods. They're supposed to make things better. Cleaner lawns, matching mailboxes, picture-perfect harmony. But sometimes in the pursuit of perfection, people forget the one rule that matters more than any bylaw: respect. Ruby forgot that. She thought control was the same thing as leadership, and for a while she fooled everyone, even herself. But you can't build a community by stepping on the people who live in it. I learned that the hard way, standing in the middle of my driveway while she screamed about jurisdiction and cooperation. It took police sirens and courtrooms to prove what should have been obvious all along. Ownership doesn't just mean having a deed. It means responsibility. And that's the part Ruby never understood. A few weeks later, the neighborhood threw a reunion barbecue. It was Richard's idea, a way to celebrate a new start. There was laughter, music, and even a few awkward jokes about parking rules. Someone made me a t-shirt that said "Driveway Defender." I didn't wear it, but I kept it. As the sun set that night, I sat at one of the picnic tables with Sarah, my lawyer-turned-friend. She raised her lemonade glass toward me. So, Mr. Kelly, was it worth it? I thought for a moment. Yeah, I said finally. It was. I didn't pick the fight, but I finished it the right way. She smiled. And you did it without losing your temper. That's rare. I grinned. Who says I didn't lose it? I just hid it behind paperwork. She laughed, and for the first time in a long while I felt completely at peace. As I walked home later, the night air was cool, the moon bright. My driveway gleamed under the light, empty, calm, and perfectly mine. I stopped halfway up, turned back toward the quiet street, and whispered to no one in particular, "Peace tastes better when you earn it." I meant it. And so if you ever find yourself in a neighborhood like mine where someone thinks their title gives them ownership over you, remember this: stand your ground, know your rights, and keep your calm. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes the quiet truth of a signed deed speaks louder than 100 HOA meetings. Because in the end, fences and driveways don't divide people, egos do. And when you finally learn to protect your boundaries without losing your kindness, that's when you really own your peace. No matter where you live, there will always be a Ruby, someone who believes authority gives them power over others. But power without empathy turns any community into a battlefield. What this story taught me is, simple peace isn't free, it's defended. Whether it's your home, your dignity, or your rights, you have to stand up for it with patience, not rage, with truth, not pride. If you've ever had your own HOA nightmare, or a Karen who tried to boss you around, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. Let's see how many of us have fought the good fight for a little peace and sanity. And if you enjoyed this wild ride, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because trust me, around here HOA drama never really ends. There's always another Ruby waiting to be taught a lesson.